Ladies and gentlemen, before we get started on this episode, it's important to remember that we need to be empathetic and understanding of every single guest that I have on this show, so that way they understand that they can share this stuff without having any backlash coming from the community. I think it takes a lot of bravery for someone to come on this show and be able to tell about heart-wrenching things that occur. So please be understanding, empathetic, and supportive to my guests. If you enjoyed this content, it would really help me out if you did three things. You followed me on Twitter, you subscribed to me on YouTube, and you share out this video to any of your friends who might also enjoy this content. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. Today, I have a very wonderful guest, previous coach and analyst for Team Liquid. Moving on to that, he soared the ranks into the analyst desk of the North America League Champions Series. Also a producer and content creator with Offline TV. Please welcome Mark Zimmerman, also known as MarkZ. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me. And you got my name right. A lot of people say Marks or the MarkZ or the Marks.
Yeah, well,
you said MarkZ.
When you have a last name like Panashevitz, MarkZ is pretty easy.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited. I obviously threw this idea out here for this kind of like different content, delving more into your life. And I have done a fair amount of research on you, and there is not much about like you as the person. There's you related to like Team Liquid. There's you related to like Offline TV. And what I've always found interesting is the person behind, like what made you that person. So I'm going to start it off with a very, very easy question because I kind of like to do that. I noticed in multiple of your videos that you like to play guitar.
Yeah, I used to play a lot more.
Okay, so like what kind of stuff did you play?
I mostly played on acoustic, like finger-picked things. So there's this artist called The Tallest Man on Earth. It's all like acoustic folk rock type stuff. So I played a lot of that, and then I also listened to a lot of like post-hardcore and death metal type stuff. And so on my electric, I would play stuff more like that.
Those are very, very different extremes.
Yeah, I don't know. This was just, I listened to, like everyone always asks, like, oh, what's your favorite kind of music? And everyone says, oh, I like a lot of different things. But yeah, I actually do listen to mostly rock music. So as long as there's a guitar in it, then I'll probably listen to it. Country's probably the only thing I don't really like, but there's a lot of subgenres too. Like I don't really like thrash. I don't really like old punk. That was like a lot rougher. I don't know. So anything with a guitar, I'll give it a listen.
Okay. So did you play with people like growing up, or was it more of like a solo habit, something you're only doing with yourself?
It was something I just picked up in college. There was I lived randomly one summer with this guy who was a pretty good musician, and he made me kind of want to learn guitar. And so, I mean, we live in the age of the internet, so I bought a guitar off him and then just spent literally a couple hours every single day playing guitar until I got decent at it.
So was that to try to show off, or was that for yourself? Because I know a lot of people, I won't lie that I'm slightly guilty of this. When I first learned how to play guitar, it was definitely because I was a little bit socially awkward and I wanted to maybe better my avenue at finding a partner.
No, it was not socially motivated for me. It was just something that I had played, like I had gone and tried to learn drums a long, long time ago. Like when I was like 10, my mom took me to drum class, basically just like kind of daycare kind of thing. Like, hey, go learn drums. And I always sucked at music. I'm awful. I have like no sense of rhythm. No, like I'm basically tone deaf as far as I'm concerned. Like I just have no idea. So it's just something where I was like, I'm gonna try and like learn this. I really like rock music. I want to get better at guitar, and so I just played for myself. I don't think I've ever really played for anybody. Like, not like I haven't ever wanted to do a show. People come over, they start playing guitar. I'm not like hopping in there. Like that's not really what I do.
So you don't really like the social interaction for it. It's more for your own self gratitude and what you can do with it for yourself.
Yeah, it was just like I want to learn this skill. It seems difficult. It seems cool. Seems fun. So that's mostly why I did it. Even like playing for like if a friend came over and was like, "Hey, play the guitar for me," I would get like nervous and my hands would start shaking and I would fuck up and couldn't play anything correctly. So I was definitely not a performer.
It took me a long time before because I have missing fingers, so I ended up picking up guitar too. And I picked it
Ah,
up. Part of it was the social thing, but another thing was like everyone told me I would never be able to play guitar again, so it was more like a fuck you to everyone who said that. I'm
yeah,
really,
that's
I'm really
that's a pretty good reason.
I'm really big into, and then I played shows and stuff. So I saw that, and I was always like, oh my god, maybe Mark likes to play and likes to play with other people. Maybe this is something that he could start to do more often.
No, I actually haven't played guitar. I have this like habit of like wanting to learn something new, and I learn until I'm what I feel competent enough, and then I kind of like just move on from it. So guitar was this thing for like 3 or 4 years. I played like a ton until I could play a couple of songs that I really liked that I thought were like relatively difficult. And once I could play them decently enough, I was like, all right, I'm gonna like I don't know. It's not like I make a decision to stop playing, but my interest just slowly fades out.
So that idea of I like to learn something to a proficient, what I feel is a proficient level, is that something you've done with almost everything?
Uh, Intentionally or not, yeah, for the
Okay.
most part. Like,
Because I mentioned, especially early on, that's a big drive then.
right, I would say so. Like when something catches my interest, I like to understand it, at least on some level. So like, guitar and music, everyone likes music, and especially like I like rock music. So I was like, all right, I'll try and like learn about this, and like, learning about pinch harmonics and natural harmonics and all that stuff is like there's some science behind it that's really fucking cool, and so like that part definitely drew me in as well. But yeah, for most things, I would get interested in it, I would learn it, and uh, as long as it's not something I was doing for my career, eventually I would give that up for something else. So
Mhm.
before guitar, I played basketball. I would spend a couple hours every day shooting basketball because I really liked watching basketball and I wanted to like have a good jump shot and like all that stuff. So I played a lot of basketball, and then once I well, actually rolled my ankle a couple times, and then I started slowing down on playing basketball, and I kind of replaced that with guitar. And then like I'm usually doing something to like learn.
Mhm. So what is your current focus now? What is the current thing that is driving Mark Z?
Uh, I would say for the better part of the last year and a half, it's probably been like content,
Okay.
and not just like being on camera as content, but like behind the scenes and like how all that works. So as you can probably tell, when I started with offline TV as a producer, it was mainly motivated by the opportunity to do something with a very talented group of people in a role I've never tried to be before. So I was definitely not the best producer back then, and like I've learned and grown a lot about like what goes into a shoot and how to do it correctly. But that was another thing that was motivated by like trying to figure something out.
Mhm. So, looking at growing up and what made that drive, has it always been like that? Like growing up has always been those moments where you like something for a little while and then you replace it. Has it always been like that?
Not really. I think it really started to take off in college,
Hmm.
where like now that I wasn't living at home and I wasn't like you could do whatever you wanted in college. Like I was like, oh, I have a lot of free time. What am I gonna do? Because in high school it was like parents breathing down your neck. You had to go do your homework. You had to go. They made me do a bunch of like clubs, and like every season I was doing some sport. I wasn't good at any of them. I was on
Did you
varsity
enjoy
for
them?
yeah, I enjoyed them for the most part, but like it wasn't like this is what I want to be spending all my time on. I was a big gamer my entire life growing up because my dad kind of got me into it. So like now that I was completely on my own, yeah, I played a lot of games, but I also wanted to like I just wanted to do other stuff too.
Hmm.
So I didn't really start like picking up things with the intention of actually learning them. But I guess it was happening in high school too, obviously, because you're taking like 8 different classes and stuff like that. But
Hmm. So, growing up, you mentioned your mom putting you into these different things. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
yeah, so I have an eldest sister, a middle brother, and then I'm the youngest brother.
Oh, you're the youngest. You're one of
Uh-huh.
those. You're all,
Yep.
all. How? What's the age difference between the three of you?
It's about 2 years between each of us.
Okay, so you got to experience them going through like growing up and them going through classes beforehand. Where'd you go to? Where'd you grow up in? What area?
We grew up in a little nice town outside Boston. It's called Needham. It's like 20 minutes outside the city.
Hmm. And so what was the school life like? Because I know that my brother is 4 years younger than me, And I know being
Hmm.
an older sibling, there was definitely times where I would like go and I would try to stick up for him, or I would try to do things. Did you ever have that experience? Like, what was your experience with your siblings related to like going to school?
So so we all went to like Catholic private schools growing up. Obviously, Boston area.
Hmm.
There's a lot of Catholics, still have Catholic private schools. So we all went to the same elementary and middle school, but then we went to what's the opposite of co-ed? I don't know. Uh, all guy, all girl
Yeah,
schools.
yeah.
So my sister was never like even around really during high school from my perspective because at that point she was 4 years older than me, so she was graduating when I was going into high school, and then she's going off to college. And before that, she's at an all-girls school, not even in the same town as me. So like, we would only see each other at home. But my brother went to the same school as me, and he was only 2 years older. So there was definitely a typical younger brother, older brother thing where the younger brother's a nuisance who probably does some shitheaded stuff for his brother's attention because he looks up to him. And the older brother's an asshole back and tries to shut all that down, but then when push comes to shove, will stick up for him, like you said. So I think it was a pretty typical older brother, younger brother thing. We were pretty close in high school. We got closer together because we went to a youth group, so like a church group thing,
Hmm.
and he introduced me to that. So we were actually relatively closer from high school or during high school than I think a lot of other older brother, younger brother pairs.
Okay. So you mentioned one of the reoccurring themes that comes up is like religion, actually.
Hmm.
Are you religious now?
Not practicing.
Okay.
Uh, I've become very lazy, but I've done a lot of thinking on it, and I don't think I've flipped my viewpoint at all.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of effort, which is actually probably the worst answer you could give from from a
I think it's an honest one though.
yeah.
I don't like dishonest answers, so I'd much rather you tell me something that's real and honest than something that is dishonest, right? So that's a very real answer.
Yeah, I think most people would be like, "Oh, I'm figuring it out," so that it doesn't sound as bad. It's like, no, I actually believe this stuff, but I'm just kind of a dumbass who's not going to actually follow what he believes. So I think,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm being honest, but it's not good.
So growing up in that, like, you obviously grew up in a very very religious kind of like environment, as far as like your school system at least. I take it your parents are both Catholics then.
No, so my mom is Catholic. My dad is what's called a Mennonite, which is basically a offshoot in the Protestant religion. He was, as far as I can tell, not very religious.
Okay. Are
So it's
you
more my mom's side.
are your parents still together? Or
Yes.
okay. Okay, so that must have was that a little bit of conflict? Because I know that I've seen other parents where one parent is very religious and the other one isn't, and then sometimes that can cause a lot of conflict that occurs. Growing up myself, my stepmom was actually very religious and my dad wasn't, and so there was definitely moments where like we'd be going to church and they're like, I don't really want to go to church, and then they'd get into an argument over it, and it was always a very interesting dilemma for me as a child. What about for you?
Uh, I think my dad is pretty go with the flow on a lot of things, and I think this was something that early on in their relationship, my mom probably like was like, "You're gonna have to be okay with like me raising the kids, this way." My dad was like, "All right, whatever." I think it was who knows how easy that conversation went down, but I didn't really see the religious element as much of a conflict. Like we went to church every Sunday, and my dad was there pretty much all of the time.
Hmm.
And if I don't know if you know any Catholic tradition stuff like that, but like you're not supposed to go up and
Yeah.
receive the communion if you're not Catholic. So my dad wouldn't go up, but he would be there every Sunday.
Hmm.
So I think it was the kind of thing where, my mom probably influenced him into being like, listen, we're going to church every Sunday, so like get used to it. And then I think it was the kind of thing where it wasn't really a source of conflict because they were on the same page.
Okay. So, growing up, you did a lot of different activities. What were
Yep.
some of those activities that you did? And was there some that you liked much better than others?
Yeah, so pretty much I was always signed up for like the whatever town league thing was going on that season. So soccer, hockey, baseball. I took swim lessons. Like they just like always had you doing something,
Hmm.
um, physical for the most part. And then obviously in school you're learning whatever they're teaching in school. And then in the summers I would usually go to camps. So sometimes it'd be like a swim camp. Sometimes it would be a science camp. I really really liked the science camps I went to. Would definitely those were my favorite. They were just like general camps, basically like I said, daycare for summer. And then as I got older, I started going to a couple sleepaway camps, like for rock climbing and like random stuff like that.
So I like how you keep putting it like daycare. Were you a problem child?
A little bit, not that bad. I was definitely a bit of a. I wouldn't say I was a problem child, but I was definitely a nuisance at points.
Okay. Did you ever have any troubles in school with that?
Uh, when I was really young, like first, second grade, third grade, I was a bit of a bully actually.
Really?
So, yeah. So I got in trouble a couple times with the principal and my teachers and my parents. But then as I got into like fourth, fifth, sixth grade, uh, not quite puberty, but like you start having your interests, and like I was very interested in computer games and computers and science, and I was more of a nerd. And so like by the time like middle school and high school hit, I was like pretty much in the nerd camp. So like
Okay.
not a bully at all, but like for very early kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I was a bit of a bully, and that got me in some trouble.
Okay. Yeah, you bad boy, you MarkZ,
Yeah,
Jesus.
I mean,
Oh.
it's
So
not that hard to see these days.
I know, right? Like it's very, very common actually. So looking at like the bullying, did you when you switched camps, did you suffer from the reverse end of that?
Yeah, a little bit. Like in high school, one like my junior year, I was like, I've never played football. I really like football. If I don't play football now, I'll never be able to play football like in an organized setting again. So I randomly signed up for football. I sucked. You go to like the camps for like you do the 2-a-days or whatever to like get ready for the season. There's just tons of bullying going on in those in general. So I definitely at different points in time had felt the opposite end of it. What was funny about my school for high school was like the first 2 or 3 years, like freshman, sophomore, and a little bit of junior, people were pretty like a typical high school bullying people and stuff like that. And then like what eventually I think we realized was that there were no girls there to impress. And so by end of junior year and start of senior year, everyone in my class was just super chill because it was like, why are we doing anything? Like there's no one here to impress. It's just other dudes. You're not getting anywhere. So I think after a little bit of time, my high school chilled out a lot by senior year.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you had in one of your videos. I remember listening, and you mentioned that anxiety and stress has been an issue for you, and that you've dealt with it in different ways growing up. Was some of that starting to come out during your high school years,
Uh,
or was it
I
before
would
that?
not. No, I don't think. I think it was after then.
Okay.
Really, I think like I was self-conscious and worried about how I looked or sounded or whatever, the same way anyone in high school
Yeah.
was, but it was not to a degree that was larger than anyone else, and it definitely wasn't uh, incapacitating in any sense. It was just the typical awkward kid phase.
Okay. So you're leaving high school. High school sounds like it was a pretty good experience for you, or at least
Yeah, for the most part.
for the most part. You're thinking about going into college, right? You're looking at that. What made you decide? I know that you had a love of games, but what made you fully say, "I'm gonna commit into like game design and development"?
So I obviously really like games. My dad was in computers his whole life, so we always had a good computer in the house. And like ever since I was like 3, and he put Microsoft Flight Sim on the computer, I was like, this shit's amazing. So I've been playing games my whole life, and it was one of the only two things I really wanted to do. The other one was physics, and so my dad recommended I take AP programming class just to see like, well, what goes into making games is programming for the most part. I mean, obviously, there's art and directing and all the other stuff that goes into games, but from his perspective, it was like if you don't like programming, which is what games are built on, maybe you shouldn't go into making games. So I took a programming class, really enjoyed it. So that was when I was like, okay, I should probably major in this. And so I just looked at different colleges that had game design courses because this was at this point, holy shit, like almost 10 years ago. So the game design program was starting to show up at colleges, but it wasn't super prominent. And a lot of the game design courses were just probably there in name to attract the attention of people like me. So you had to do a little bit of research to make sure you're going to a school with actual good game design program.
Okay. And so that made you decide on the school that you went to then? You just thought it was a
Yeah,
good program?
RIT was a good combination of where it was located, price, and education for me.
Hmm. So you mentioned that your dad was a big part. It sounds like a very, very big part of your, like a monumental part of your life growing up. And it sounds like someone that you might even still be very close to and value his opinion a lot. And you mentioned like the schooling thing. He sounds like a very wise person to help out. What has he been to you in like your life?
He's been a very big mentor and father figure, but it's like this funny thing, at least as far as my mind remembers it, where like in terms of day-to-day interactions in my early childhood up until high school, like it was very predominantly my mom,
Mm-hmm.
like picking me up after classes and school and driving me home and making me dinner and helping me with homework and stuff like that. Like I remember a lot more of my mom than my dad at those times. But then when puberty hits and you start being like, I hate my parents kind of phase, I started spending a lot more time with my dad. And my dad was still there. Like when I was younger, he
Yeah.
would be the one to take me to hockey because he loved hockey. So like uh, he would always bring me to that stuff. And I had a lot of in-depth conversations with my dad growing up about physics and religion and stuff like that. And so when high school hits and I'm starting to like think more about career stuff, we were very much because he went to school for physics,
Mm-hmm.
so we have very similar interests our whole lives. So I think naturally I relied on him for a lot of advice.
What did your parents do for a living, if I may ask?
So my mom is a physical therapist, and then my dad, uh, he's changed jobs. Well, not a ton, but so he went to school for physics. He got a PhD in physics from MIT, and then promptly did nothing
Wow.
with it, and went into like computers and just made like a bunch of startups with his friends and stuff. And then now he's a business consultant and or like an expert kind of guy who does consulting jobs. I don't really. He just does whatever he wants a little bit.
Consultancy that is actually real, not like esports consultancy.
No, no, not this fake ass like, well, let me tell you about some random numbers. Like he's an expert witness on cases and like they always bring him on as like the tech guy. So that's what he does.
It was funny once I first started getting into esports. I thought about putting consultancy like related to mental health because that's what I've done as mental health consultancies for like tribal nations and stuff like that. And then I learned what a consultant meant in esports, and I was like, God bless it, I can't even use it as a title. It's
No,
gone.
it is a complete meme at this point to say you're an esports consultant.
Yeah, it is quite sad. So you go
Yeah.
to school for game development or game design and development, and you're going
Mhm.
through college. What was college like for you? Because I know that for me, college was a pretty staple portion of my life. It influenced a lot of the way that I made decisions later on. I grew a lot there. And looking at esports in general, actually, I think it's starting to become less prevalent now where more people actually have degrees. But especially early on in esports, a degree in esports was not a massively common thing, I don't think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people early in esports were like kids who blew up in like high school who know life to game or something like WoW or I don't know about in Korea. That's obviously
Yeah.
different, but like COD or Counter Strike 1.6. Like it felt like a lot of those people were pretty young, and obviously you're not going to get a degree if you're traveling around
Yeah.
playing that stuff. For me, I didn't even really follow esports until college. Like I think League of Legends technically came out in beta in 2009,
Yeah.
and that's the year I graduated. And I had been looking for a MOBA like game for a long time because I played Dota on Warcraft 3 a
Hmm.
little bit, but I wasn't very good. And then I was a subscriber to PC Gamer magazine. They talked about a bunch of games that were coming out based off Dota, and this was like Demigod, um, Heroes of New Earth, League of Legends, all those like knockoffs that were coming out.
Hmm.
So I tried a lot of them, and that's when I got into League. Uh, and then from there, that's when I got into esports. But back to the question more about college, I think it was a time where I went through a lot of self-discovery,
Hmm.
and I think that's kind of why the idea of me like intentionally looking for new things to try, like guitar and basketball and all this stuff, started to become more prevalent, as well as having more free time. But I also took a lot of like I got a minor in philosophy, so I like did a lot of like thinking, I guess, about who I was. The first year of college, I was kind of like the typical like, hey, I'm a douchebag guy. Like, am I getting laid yet? Like, kind of like everyone who goes into college. And then as time went on, kind of similar to the high school transformation where you're like trying to be something and then you realize it doesn't matter. It was a very similar thing in college, whereas like college gets built up as this party hard, go be crazy, like you're supposed to do tons of crazy shit. And I did a little bit of that in freshman year, not that crazy, but just like I wanted to try and live that lifestyle. And then like as time went on, I was like, this isn't really what I'm about.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of those self-discovery moments, like the big ones that hit that maybe other people can relate to, or maybe you can even help some people through those moments?
I don't know if there was like ever any kind of like eureka moment where it all clicked. I think it was like just you just keep thinking on it. So like uh for me, like when I started studying philosophy, a lot of it was like, the common like entry points, like I think therefore I am,
Yeah.
cogito ergo sum, all that stuff, and that kind of opened my eyes into like thinking deeper about those kinds of things. And then uh you kind of start establishing what I would say is like your own personal life philosophy, and so like what matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
And like you have, as long as like for me, I think philosophy is one of those things where it's like completely useless on a day-to-day setting, but it will be the foundation and underpinnings of everything you become as a person, as long as like you have a good solid foundation. If you lack that, you're probably going to struggle a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say college was when I started building that foundation. And so I don't think I have a good like, oh, I realized this, and then this stuff happens. But like now, whenever I approach something, I have like a pretty useful, like I just try and break it down as small as it can get, the same way you would do with philosophy or something like that.
So what I've noticed, a lot of people who go to college, they tend to have a value system leaving college. And so like for me, one of the big value systems that I kind of took away was this idea that I'm always going to live like very, very honestly and truthfully. And I'm going to kind of like incorporate that in everything I'm going to do. I'm going to try to find the truth to every moment. I'm going to try to be as truthful as I can be. It does get me in trouble sometimes because sometimes being honest is not a nice thing. But I think that everyone finds this sort of value system or something that kind of dictates the rest of their life. What was yours kind of like? Like the idea of what did you find? What did you learn about yourself that kind of has dictated the rest going forward?
I think the like you said, the idea of honesty was pretty important. And what was important about when I took philosophy was like, you study epistemology and ontology and like all these like studies of like what is knowledge, what is truth. And sadly, like a lot of these things that you come up with is like relative things, and like how can you define certain things and classifications and demarcations and all this stuff, and it gets pretty messy, and you realize it's actually really hard to really define truth in any like everyone's going to agree on it kind of way, which like initially in my college days I was like, yeah, that's just like a philosophical problem. It doesn't have as many real world applications. And then yeah, you have your truth and someone else has their truth, and then like you kind of get along with that. So I just try and be as honest to like myself as I can be in situations, and as honest as like what actually happened from my perspective. And I think what's important to note is that you have your own personal biases, of course. So like when you're giving your perspective, try and understand where you're short as well. So that's, I guess, a lot of what I try and do.
That's actually really good, the idea of understanding your own personal biases. And a lot of times you don't see that with people, and or at least willing to acknowledge it. And especially if you look at like the world as a whole, that must give you a very odd viewpoint compared to a lot of other people, because everyone has this bias. And so that if you're anything like me, because I try to do the same thing, then a lot of times it feels like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place with a bunch of different people.
Yeah, the political climate is one that's very uncomfortable to be in right now as someone who tries to take a relatively moderate approach to a lot of things. So yeah, definitely feel a little like that, but I also think it's the kind of thing where if you can explain yourself well, I think, and people or don't already have like a horrible preconceived reason to hate you, for the most part, they'll hear you out. So I don't know.
Yeah. So moving forward, you end up graduating. Do you actually get a job with game design? Because I did not see anywhere on there. I saw you were trying to maybe rework a portfolio. Were you working for any game design companies during that time?
No. So what happened with college was like basically I didn't try hard enough, I would say. Like, yeah, I have this. I would say, you're talking about life philosophies a little bit. Like, I'm definitely a minimalist in the sense where I will do whatever is the bare minimum to get what is an acceptable outcome in a lot of ways. So, like, in high school, my parents were like, hey, get A's and B's. C's are not acceptable. And so I would do whatever it took to get A's and B's. And sometimes I could get them with the bare minimum effort, like the A's and like physics and math and the things that came naturally and easy to me. I got the A's. English, social sciences, history, those kind of things. B's and fighting to keep above C's. And so like I would just do whatever it took to do what was necessary. And when I got to college and I had the same approach, that's not it's not a good approach when you have like when you want a good job, when you want people to want you to be going through. And yeah, I had a good GPA, but like my group coursework, I was good at group coursework. I never didn't do the work, which is like an important thing for me, is that like I will always get the work done. If you give me a ridiculous workload, even though I'm a minimalist, I still do all of it. It's not like I don't do the work. So that mattered a lot more in esports when I was working like 12 to like 14 hours a day. And it's like, well, this is the minimum work you need to do. But if the minimum work is 2 hours, I only work 2 hours on it. So like I would do the projects and I would make a project and I would get a B and I'd be like, great. But people don't want to hire a B project. So my portfolio sucked. And so when I started applying for places leaving college, I kind of regretted the fact that I did not try harder at like group projects and stuff like that. And I didn't have a good portfolio. So when I graduated early, once again, because I'm a minimalist, I'm like, how do I get out of here as fast as possible at college? And I made sure I had the maximum number of credits every class I could. I filled all my summers with internships because we were required, I forget what they were called, co-ops or something.
Yeah, I think they're called co-ops.
Yeah, so I had to get 3 co-ops, so I did those all my summers and one random one. And so like I had graduated, we had trimesters, so I technically graduated was a trimester early. Yeah, it's really awkward. So I graduated a trimester early, and I spent that entire trimester just like being like, I applied to a couple places, didn't hear back seriously from any of them. Riot Games was of course one of those. And I realized like I just don't have anything that wows anybody. Like I don't think anyone would look at what's on my resume or my portfolio. Oh, that
was weird.
Just switch. Yeah, my cameras just randomly do that. Anyways, I spent like about 6 to 9 months working on portfolio stuff. So after I graduated, I moved back in with my parents and worked on making my own game. And I never worked post-graduation anywhere for game design, but I went, like I said, I had a couple of those co-ops.
So your own game, what was your own game?
So this is actually cool. To be fair, it wasn't 100% my own game. I worked on a group project, and this was one of the only group projects I worked on at college where I was like, this is actually really fucking cool and like could be something more. And I asked all of them who worked on the project as they're graduating and stuff, like, do you want to like actually work on this together as a group and take this further? And they said, no, I'm not really interested. And I said, do you mind if I do it? They said, go for it. And so I then it's called Gravity Bomb, spent a long time making it. And then I released it on Steam when they had like the green light phase where you could like put up the thing, community votes on if they're interested in it. During this time, I also started working for Steve for Curse in like a tryout period. And so after I released that game, I kind of stopped following it. And I finally looked at it like a couple months ago and it was greenlit. And I was like, oh shit, I can put my game on Steam and say I have a game on Steam. And then when I tried to find the source files, it was just like 5 years ago I made the game. I couldn't find the source files anymore. So I can't actually make the game. I can't give it to people to play, but there is a demo up that people can download and play.
That is really neat. I feel like you should go back into game design and like finish this game now that we're all just waiting for.
The game's done. I released it. I released it on what was called IndieDB. It was like the place where people just put up their shitty games.
Mm-hmm.
I released it there. That website went under. Can't find anything. And then the other place was Steam, that I was going to put it on, but I had to wait to get greenlit, and it never got greenlit. And now all my files, or I didn't get greenlit when I had the files, and now it's just gone. And there's no way I'm making it again because, like I said, it took like 6 months to make.
Did it have good reviews?
People liked it for the most part. It wasn't great. One of the hardest things about it was a puzzle platform shooter thingy.
Mm-hmm.
Movement in games is really hard to make feel good, and I definitely did not make some of the movement feel good. Jumping felt a little jank, which is pretty horrible for a platformer.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, it was much more about the shooting element than the platforming element. So whatever. Either way, I would give it like a 7. Good concept, decent execution, lots to be improved on.
Okay, 7. I'm gonna go look this up now later on and be like.
You can find the demo. It's out there.
I'm gonna play the demo and I'm just gonna be disappointed because there's not gonna be more. It's like you're slowly reeling them in. And it's gonna be like, nope, that's it. That's all you get.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I tried. I tried to contact my college, who I might have had like on a cloud server there somewhere if I left the files up. I tried talking to a lot of people, but I couldn't find them.
Unlucky. So you mentioned that anxiety was an issue, and you said that it started mostly in college, right?
Yep.
Okay, so when did that start? Like, was it your first year? When did you really start to notice that?
I think it was my second year. It was my sophomore year. And I don't remember the day or anything like that, but I have a very specific memory of one time I had like this 8 a.m. class, and I woke up for it, and every day I would go and I'd get like this breakfast sandwich from like the cafe area near it, and an orange juice, and I went and I bought the thing, and I took one bite of it, and I was like, I just don't feel good eating this at all. Like I had an upset stomach, so I threw it out, and then from that day onwards, for the next like 5 years, 6 years, I could not eat in the mornings for like the first 5 or 6 hours I woke up, and that entire time my stomach was just like nauseous and queasy. I don't know why it started then or what the significance of anything going on at that time. I don't remember anything about that other than like I always ate this sandwich for breakfast. I like routines, so I was like, I'm gonna eat this thing every day, and then I was like, I can't eat this anymore. And ever since then, I couldn't eat. Well, I'm better now, but like for like I said, 5 or 6 years, I could not eat in the morning.
Mm-hmm. And so how did
and then it kind of progressed from there.
I was gonna ask, how did it progress from there? What did that progression look like? What was the worst moment? Like getting up to the worst moment?
Okay. So worst moment was actually post college. It was actually like in esports, but in college, it mostly manifested itself is I would get really nauseous in the mornings and then start to feel better. And then at nights, if I went out drinking, I just suddenly had like a really weak stomach. So like if I mixed what I was drinking a little bit too much, so like if I had a beer and a shot or Coke and rum and then the beer or something, like I had to be really careful about that. I couldn't chug beer for the life of me. I would just barf instantly. My stomach just became really weak in general. And I was like I said, just generally a little anxious, like whenever I went out and stuff. And then I was also specifically very anxious around girls. So if I don't know why it came out, but if like we started talking one-on-one or like breaking away from where the party's at, like have a smoke outside or something, I would start getting really, really anxious. And then like assuming I'd been drinking that night, then my stomach would really start churning. And sometimes I'd have to be like, oh, let me step away for a second, go bah! in the bathroom or like around the corner. So I started barfing a lot.
Okay.
Just like generally across. If I tried to eat in the morning, sometimes I would barf. I would try and like do that. And that's mostly all it was in high school. In college, it was mostly related to like morning sickness, I guess, and then social interactions with the feminines.
Did that make relationships really hard?
Yeah, I was single until 24. I didn't have a girlfriend until then.
Okay, that would have been esports.
Yeah, it was esports. I would not say my anxiety was a reason though. That would be scapegoating. I think it was me. It was just like how I was.
Okay, you were just really awkward and.
No, not really. like I had female friends. Even though I was in an all guy high school, I went to like I said, that youth group, and
Yeah.
so like I had a lot of female friends there. I didn't have any problem talking to them. Even with a girl I was interested in, I think I was an okay flirt. Um, I didn't like in college, freshman year and sophomore year, not very successful. But to be fair, sophomore year, like I didn't go out at all because that was like the start of like when I was like really thinking hard on philosophy, and I basically became a shut-in for a little bit and like just played games and like
The true
I was like,
philosophical
yeah, you
way.
gotta like board yourself up one week, one summer at least, if you're gonna like philosophy. No, it wasn't super related to that. It was just like I spent a lot of freshman year trying to be like this party-going douchebag. Didn't really like it. I was like, why am I doing this? I actually don't super enjoy it. So I spent a lot, like I would go hang out with my friends a lot, and sometimes my friends would go to parties. But like, I was also it was like this weird. So I don't know how it was like at your college, but it was like, where's the parties at? Where's the party?
Yeah.
Who's going to what parties? Like
To,
as a freshman undergrad.
to be fair,
So you,
I was gonna say, to be fair, where I went to school at, we got between 200 and 300 inches of snow a year, and there was nothing else to do but drink.
so I was in upstate New York, so we were fucking pounded with snow for 5 out of the 7 months we're at college, I guess. Whatever it is, 8, 9 months. So either way, like everyone was just always like, where are the parties
Yeah.
at? And you had no upperclassmen. They would try to invite you, and it was like this huge like. It's like work, like social networking.
You need to get on the list. If you don't get on the
Yeah,
list,
you
you
gotta
don't get in.
And if you showed up as dudes with no girls at an upperclassman
Yep.
party, they wouldn't let you in because they're like, we don't need more dudes here, especially at my college because it was a tech college, so there's more dudes in general. I was okay because I was friends with a bunch of so I actually wasn't friends with anyone in my own major. I was really reclusive from them. Like I was very antisocial during this time. So like I did not talk to people in my own major, which is one of the reasons my group projects usually sucked, is because like I was not social and like trying to go the extra mile. I don't think other people were either. And so the only people I was friends with were people who were in the photo program because they were on my floor the first year of college and they were who I talked and hung out with. So I was mostly friends with photo kids, was not friends with my own major, which is not a good idea either. Would not recommend that. And so after like hang out with them a lot in freshman year, going to parties and stuff, I was like, this is such like a grind. I don't really enjoy it. And so I became a lot more reclusive. And then like once you become an upperclassman, like you kind of have your own groups of friends. You have your own apartments now. You can throw your own parties. And so like junior, senior, I started throwing more of my own parties with my friends, for my friends for the most part. And it was much nicer then. But there was definitely a period of time where I was very antisocial. But even then, I had friends. And then that junior, senior year, I did hook up with a couple ladies, but it was not like I didn't go very far with them intentionally, I guess. And I don't know, it's not like it was one-way street.
Do you think that you kept yourself reserved because you were scared of something, or that you didn't want to give that part of your like personality away yet? Because a relationship is a commitment.
Right. I don't know. It's one of those ones where there's probably some underlying philosophical reasons for this, or not philosophical, personality,
Yeah.
like, subconscious stuff. I don't know why, but like multiple times, like I had the opportunity to like go back to a place with a girl or have them come over to my place, and I'd be like, nah, never mind, and I would just bail on it. And of course, if you do that, people don't want to see you again, because you're kind of just shut them down. And yeah, so that happened a bunch of times. I don't know why I did it. I just had a bad habit of doing that. So that's why but it's one of the reasons I didn't have a girlfriend until post college. But like I was not very aggressive either. So like if there was a girl I was interested in, I was not like ask them to go on dates all the time or anything like that. Like I was very reserved. And then so like if a girl was interested in me, I would often do that for some reason.
Okay,
don't know why.
That's okay. So were you like that when you came to like the job front too? Because that idea of putting yourself out there, you end up graduating college, right? You're having a hard time finding jobs because no one can do it. Do you think that that's part of the reason why is that did you go after it with that aggressiveness?
No, I think I think I was relatively afraid of failure or rejection, I guess, in that sense. Where like I did apply to Riot once,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't feel comfortable with my own resume, and
Mm-hmm.
so like I didn't go reapply, or do anything like that. Later on, I didn't. I applied to a couple of the big places, but then like once it clearly wasn't working out, and I felt like I understood why it wasn't working out, I was like, I don't want to keep getting rejected and have them see that I've applied there before.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I didn't want to mess it up potentially more. So I was like, I'm gonna make something I'm proud of, so that when I send it to them, they can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was a big reason for a lot of that stuff as well. It probably was a big part of the social element, is to be fair as well. But like did not want to. If I didn't feel comfortable with what I was showing them, like why would they want to hire me? Kind of.
Yeah. So there was some self-confidence issues there in your own like ability.
For sure, for sure.
Okay, what was that like, dealing with that self-confidence? Because I imagine you realize that this isn't working out, you can't get a job. I imagine that might have been like a low point where you're like, what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty confident in my like programming skills, and I had done a couple like I had done the
Yeah.
co-ops, and I was better than the other like interns. So like I didn't have a big self-confidence problem in like my abilities, but it was like you don't know where you're going exactly.
No.
You want to get into like game design, but it's actually a pretty difficult thing to break into for a lot of people. And so like I didn't know how I was going to stand out. My dad, he's in programming as well, like I said, and so he knew I was a decent programmer, and he was always like, if you ever need a job, let me know. But they gave me this period of time to try and figure out what I was going to do. But it was, I would say like it's one of these things that I spent a lot of time thinking on, like the difference between self-consciousness and like self-awareness versus self-doubt, and like what are the differences between all of them. And I would say I was someone who was very full of self-doubt, but I was not super self-conscious, because I feel like when you're self-conscious, a lot of things from other people's opinions matter to you. And you spend a lot of time thinking about what other people's perceptions of you are. And it can manifest itself in like,
Yeah.
a lot of other ways. But for me, I was full of self-doubt. Like I did not care what other people really thought of me. But I didn't think that like I was good enough in this way, or I didn't think I was good enough in that way. I think that's, you're kind of splitting hairs here, but to me, I didn't care what other people thought about me, really. Like I was more than all right being like the kind of somewhat weird guy that I was in college. That didn't bother me. Once I had kind of like been like, yeah, this is who I am come senior year. And my anxiety definitely hit its worst point, where I had this interview with this company. I forget what it was. I think it was like Game Show Network people who were like making online games as versions of their ones. And I just froze in the meeting. Like they asked me a pretty simple, like, if you ever have interview for a technical job, usually what starts is you go through a couple of preliminary interviews where they're just asking your history and stuff you've done, how confident you feel, and then you usually get one really heavy day of interviews that are full of like technical people who you're going to end up working with, and they ask you a couple of questions and stuff like that. And I was doing fine, get to my first technical interview, and the guy asked a pretty generic algorithm problem, and like my brain just like locked up, froze, couldn't figure out the problem for the life of me, even though it was super easy. And that was like in the middle of my series of interviews, and I had known I completely fucked it up at that point, because I had just bombed in front of this guy, and so like I got so nervous and anxious over that eventually I had to go like excuse myself, and this was a phone interview, thank God, so I was just in my own place, but like I had to go, and I just threw up in my bathroom, and then like came back, and that's when work related anxiety started manifesting itself. Probably with that was like the worst of it, where like I actually threw up in a job interview, but it continued onwards from there as I got more into esports.
So you end up working on this game for a while. You do a trial with Curse, looking at getting into Curse. You obviously help them through, and then they decide to pick you up. Yep. And so begins your stint into the long area of esports.
Yep.
So you come in there, and you have all of this the stress and anxiety that you've already had from other like work related stuff, going through school. Having worked in esports, I cannot imagine that being a bonus to the work environment, because it is an extremely stressful environment.
Yeah. So for people who don't understand, especially in LCS, why it's so scary is if you are one of the bottom teams come the end of the split, you have to play in promotion relegations. And so if you lose those, you get kicked out of the league and you lose your job. So all split long, if you're a team that's struggling, which very frequently my team was in a position, even though we finished pretty well by the end of most of my splits, in those moments, it was a very real fear that we might have to be playing a promotion relegation in a couple of weeks. So it was an extremely stressful environment. I got brought on with this other guy at the same time, and he was just straight incompetent. I mean, I could go on longer talking about it, but he was incompetent and got let go within like a month or two of moving into the house. And so like I'm like, holy shit, this dude just got fired. I was working like crazy hours trying to like, same way the pros play crazy hours. Everyone's doing crazy hours in esports. And so it definitely had a pretty horrible effect on my stomach.
Yeah. So I imagine that going through, I imagine your worst point must have been esports because of how stressful it is on top of that.
Yeah.
What was the worst moment that you're like, oh my God, what do I do?
I don't think I ever had like a full-on breakdown or anything like that. But like day to day, I would wake up feeling nauseous, and I still had like the same problems at night or drinking. Socially, I just completely shut down. Like I was like, I don't have time for social stuff. So like, I didn't talk to. I have a bad habit even before going to esports where like I don't talk to people if they're not like in my immediate vicinity. So like I didn't really talk to my high school friends when I was in college. When we went home for breaks, I would talk to them. Didn't do it at all after that. And same with college. When we went to esports, didn't talk to any of my college friends, didn't talk to anyone, didn't have any friends really in the scene to talk to. Didn't make an effort to. Eventually, I became friends with Josh Kim, my roommate now, because he started working at Curse a little bit too. But that was like months into, almost 6 months into working in esports. I had my parents I could talk to, but they didn't really get it, and I didn't really like talking to them. So like, I'd have like a bi-weekly phone call for like 30 minutes just to catch up. But I wasn't going to tell them about my problems. They had no idea I had anxiety problems even in college. Really, I just didn't talk to people about how I felt about things at all. And so I basically only had workplace relationships, and that's it. And I lived in the house, worked in the house, because I slept in a closet at Curse, all this stuff. So the day to day was relatively bad, relative to someone who doesn't have anxiety. I didn't feel like it was like I didn't feel like I couldn't work. I felt like I was still effective, but like I couldn't eat in the mornings. I couldn't eat large quantities. So like I would go out and get like 3 tacos and like beans and rice, a pretty typical like cheap Mexican food place. I could only eat half of it at a time. So like I was just permanently like in a state of like my stomach being in knots. Yeah, that's mostly what it was like.
Okay. So
then it would get worse on like LCS days where like I just wouldn't eat on LCS days and stuff like that for the most part. Like after the games I could eat, but like before going into the games and that kind of stuff, I wouldn't be able to eat.
So you mentioned that you even briefly saw. You said a psychologist. Was it a psychologist?
Yeah, a therapist.
Okay. There's a big difference. If you're in the mental health field, there is a big difference between the two. So that's why I wanted to check, because a lot of times people get called sports psychologists in esports and they're not. They're psychological consultants.
This is the one I found through my insurance agency.
Okay.
So like I hope they were.
They were a therapist. They were at least a therapist then. Okay.
Right.
So what was that like for you?
So the reason I went for that person was, or like I started being like I should go talk to somebody was, I went through my first year in esports after we lost and didn't get qualified through by into Worlds. Like you hit that kind of dead period in the off season, and I had cut off everything in my life that was not work. At this point, so I was like, I don't know what the fuck to do. So I tried going to esports parties and like trying to get to know people and stuff again and have social friends. And like, you know, like I said, I don't think I was ever really super awkward um, around people. I hope not, at least. So like I quickly became friends with other people in the scene now that I was like actually talking to them. Because before, if there was a house party, like CLG would throw a house party, I wouldn't go. Coast had some stuff, I wouldn't go. I just didn't go to anything. Now I started going and start making friends in the scene. But like I'm 24 years old at this point, like never been in a relationship. You start having those thoughts like you're gonna die alone, crop up into your head. And so that was definitely a situation where like going back to my first year of esports and those last 2 years of college, I think one of the reasons that I didn't end up in a relationship was I didn't really like any of them. Like I wasn't excited, the butterfly feeling. It's kind of just like, hey, this is college, this is what you do. And so it had been a couple years since I was like excited about a girl. And so I finally met someone in esports who I was excited about, and just like going through that of like, oh shit, this is like how you're supposed to like interact with someone else was a very like difficult part for me, where I was just like, what the fuck am I doing? And it was one of those things where like I didn't have anyone to talk to about this stuff because I didn't have any friends. So I was like, I really need someone to talk to, so I'm gonna pay someone to listen to me. Because I was like, I'm not gonna talk to my parents about it. I'll just worry them. And I don't have any friends, so I'm gonna go get a therapist to like talk about some of the struggles I was going through during that time, about like re-socializing myself a little bit.
And you make it sound like you didn't have a very good experience with it.
With the
therapist, yeah.
I hope I don't make it sound that bad. I think the biggest benefit was finally having someone to talk to. And like my therapist, she didn't say anything that was like groundbreaking.
Okay.
But like, you know, it wasn't like Goodwill Hunting where I fucking end up falling in her arms and embracing her.
That's good, because that would be an ethical quandary, I would think. So.
Yeah, so it was just like I was pretty aware of like what my problems were. I've just never vocalized them. And I think that's something that a lot of people probably do as well, where like you just kind of like lock it in and it just boils over, and at some point you got to let them out, like the catharsis of it. And like I had never done that, and so I was someone who was not comfortable opening up about who I was to a lot of people. And for the most part, still pretty true. Like I don't think most people need to know me that well, but the therapist was the first person basically since high school, I would say, that I was close enough with that I would talk to about what I was really feeling. And even though, like I said, I don't think she said anything that was like amazing that had never entered my head before, it was still like therapeutic to be able to go through the process of going over it. So it definitely helped, but my anxiety did not go away. It was still there through the process. I think I saw her for 6 months before I stopped going, just because.
Interesting.
Well, because I ended up in a relationship.
Yeah.
And so then I was with someone who I felt comfortable enough to open up with about how I felt about things. And so I guess in that sense in my head, I was like, I don't need a therapist to talk to, because now I have someone I can actually talk to. And it's like, if what was helping me was the venting of my emotions, then now I have someone. So I got into a relationship. I didn't feel like I needed the therapist anymore, so I stopped seeing therapists.
I mostly think it's interesting because I actually own a counseling firm in Michigan, Wisconsin. And so if my therapist had a client, it would be very unlike them to keep someone on that long if they weren't seeing progress.
Right. So I think it was the kind of thing, you know, she was very, you know, like, how are you feeling, this kind of stuff. And I was excited, like, I wanted to go. I always was like, it's time to see my therapist, time to like move forward on things. And in the beginning, you know, hearing like what I was going through, there's like, are you depressed? Are you this? Are you that?
They have to do the standard checkups.
Yeah. So like, there's a lot of like kind of like ground rule before like there was me really opening up to everything I was feeling, and then working through some of that. And then once I get everything off my chest, you know, monitoring it a little bit. I don't know. Like I said, I felt like I was getting something out of it, so I didn't feel like it was bad or anything. Yeah.
So you get into a relationship. Were you still working in esports at this time, like with teams?
Right. So this is 2015. So 2014 was the year I was completely shut down. Zero social interactions, complete shut in. End of 2014 was when I was like, holy shit, the season's over. What do I do now? And I tried to be more social. In 2015, I was resolved to try and have a healthier like work-life balance. I was like, I'm gonna try and get into like a real relationship with someone. Like I think that's pretty important to being a human being.
I would agree.
I moved out of the curse house, so I moved in with Josh, who was like my best friend. So I had a good friend now as another roommate too, as well. So like I was having more. There was more in my life than just like esports, just curse. So I was like, this is gonna lead to a healthier work-life balance, which it obviously did, as well as the therapist and this other stuff. I did a lot of things in 2015 actually. I went back to church for a little bit. One of those typical, like, I don't know what's going on in my life. I'm going to try something I used to do. I also started volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club that was like near where I lived. So 2015, I just started doing everything else I could to like be closer to how I was in college and high school and stuff like that, because I had definitely gone too far down the like, I'm going to work on Wall Street, and everyone loses their mind kind of thing.
Yeah. So you obviously branched out a lot more, and in esports there's definitely a lot of talk about like what is possible, and like the girlfriend thing is something that gets brought up all the time, whether or not it's plausible or possible. And so it sounds like you were able to successfully do that.
Yeah.
To have a girlfriend. I'm not going to make you name drop anyone or anything like that, but what was that relationship like in esports, considering how time constraining it is?
It was one that, she was in esports too, so understood it. It wasn't like some person I met at a bar who's like, "What's a computer?" And then like you're like, "Oh, that's what I do for my living." So like they understood very clearly like how it worked, and so we ended up moving in together pretty quickly, just because it was easier. And so because I had moved out of the curse house already, the fact that I wasn't there as much was already like happening. I had already moved out before I had a girlfriend or anything. So we had an office that we went to for scrims. We would scrim there. Players would go home. I would go home. If I needed to, I would go back to the players' home to keep working with the other coaches and stuff. I was always accessible on Skype. I would drive over because this was all in Santa Monica. Yeah. I would drive over if I needed to. Like anytime I was needed, I was on call. As I saw, I was on call 24/7. And all that changed is like where I went home to and what I did when I relaxed. Because, I had downtime in 2014, but what I would do is I would go through IMDb's top 100 movies and I would just start watching movies. Now I would just, instead of do that, I would spend time with other people.
Okay. So you had a very, very healthy approach to it, which I think is really good and something that people need to understand for esports.
Yeah.
So you've definitely been outspoken on different topics related to like League of Legends and esports, which I love personally. I find it very refreshing. And one of the things you mentioned was like you definitely got into it when players were doing in-house scrims and how they were lazy, which I definitely could see. Looking at the outreach of like Riot and the players union stuff that has been talked about very frequently in esports, what do you think about the current treatment of players, teams? Because it's a much bigger issue, but we definitely have some time to talk about it. What do you think about like the players union that is with Riot, and then I know that players unions have been brought up with the other esports? What do you think of them as a concept?
I think player unions as a concept are fine. What I will say is players in League of Legends are taken care of very well. And they are pretty well protected by Riot, and the ecosystem is set up in a way that very, very, very few people are getting screwed. And like the worst stuff that happens to a League esports player is like they get cut from a team or they get traded away kind of against their will or something like that for the most part. Whereas like from what I hear about other esports, like it's a lot worse. And so I don't like, there's a lot of things a player union should be doing, like pushing for what they expect out of Riot, what they expect out of the teams and that kind of stuff. And they absolutely should have one. But I'm not one of those people who think like the players are getting screwed across the board. Like, I think players are actually coming out hand over fist in terms of money, especially recently with franchising, because not having a CBA actually arguably protected them here,
Mhm.
because it pitted the investors against each other to overspend for them. So players are walking away with $500,000 plus contracts all over the place in the North American scene because there's no, CBA, collective bargaining agreement, about generally how much money should be going towards players, which if it existed probably would have lowered their income, which is only possible. I think you can only have a CBA if you have a players union. So
Mhm.
this is a situation, as far as I'm aware, where it's actually great for players that they didn't have a union. Maybe some shady stuff went down, but like the overall salary increase was monumental.
Mhm.
And players, like individuals in just general in the gaming scene, are the ones who really come out ahead. Like streamers are killing it.
Yeah.
Players are killing it in terms of money. All of them are fucking killing it. The people who are really hurting are like smaller, like groups, orgs, and stuff like that that can't quite pull in the sponsorship revenue, and they're trying to pay these pretty ridiculous salaries. Not true for all orgs, obviously. Definitely not saying everyone's
Yeah.
struggling, but as far as I'm concerned, players sometimes get screwed over, but they're pretty well compensated for that weakness in their lack of a union.
Do you think that the union has been effective so far?
No, I don't know what it's done now that
That's
they
that's
have
kind of
one.
that's kind of what I'm wondering, because I know that for Overwatch, it's been brought up a couple times about the idea of a union, and the idea of a union doesn't make sense when everyone is functionally mercenaries fighting for each other's jobs. Because you can't really get someone to be altruistic enough to say, I'm going to go strike for all these other people. No, they're like, I'll take their job, pay me instead. So the idea of a union is very interesting to me.
I think it makes sense if you are talking like, so for Riot, like, hey, we want a better practice tool. Like, I think it's bullshit that this is how we do this, or like, I want to be able to stream on Tournament Realm if we are going to do in-houses. Like, the union can get together and push as a collective on that front and sticking point, and you can use your collective weight in those kinds of arguments. Whereas like if Bjergsen just directly messages someone and is like, hey, it's bullshit, let me stream, and they go like, well, we got a policy, like it's a lot harder, I think, than if it's the collective weight of all the players. But those are the kinds of things that I think a players union would be best suited for. And like, if I'm talking about long-term health of the ecosystem, I do think in some level, like having a CBA would be very good, just to stop the kind of like self-devouring nature that feels like is happening right now in the NALCS, where teams are outbidding themselves into really precarious situations.
So the stress that goes with players, because we're talking about this, you have been in a coaching role, and I think being a coach is a very, very interesting position, because you have to look out what's best for the team, but then a part of you still wants to like make sure that your players have a good environment to some degree. How did you handle that?
So my first year, I was in 2014. I was explicitly called an analyst. Like, I wasn't really a coach. I was, as far as I'm concerned, like a sixth member of the team, where like I was with them every step of the way. I led all the meetings. I helped organize all our thoughts on things, and like would look up presentations about like, look at what these teams are doing. Should we try some of this stuff? But like, I wasn't really looked to for significant guidance in any sort of way. I think, a traditional coach is seen to be guiding a team. I was more like making sure that we stayed on the tracks that they wanted to be on in the first place. And I had like a lot of pretty serious like one-on-one talks with some of the people, depending on how receptive they were to like how much they wanted to have them, because I was not big on communication at that time. Going into 2015, where we brought Peter Zhang in and we were both coaches now, we had a bigger hand in shaping how practices looked and how we went about trying to improve, and especially with the two Koreans that we brought on in Piglet and Phoenix, how they integrated with the team, how people were feeling about them, how they were feeling about other people, including the coaching staff. I think it's a tough thing to do, especially when like, within your own team, you're not super well aligned on what's supposed to be happening. So I was sometimes a bit of, not a hard ass, but like, well, this is how it is kind of way, where it's, you just have to do things this way. So I think there were other people in the organization that players often sought talking to over like their current like mental state. Like we had Joka Steve, who lived with them, and he was a former player for Counter-Strike, former pro. He was the house manager. He's a really funny, nice, likable guy, and so a lot of the people formed really close bonds with him, and he was the guy that a lot of times they talked to for that kind of stuff. And then he would kind of filter up, what was relevant to us if someone was in a really bad place or something.
So you mentioned how franchising might lead to more long-term decision-making because the relegation system before really promoted short-term thinking. That was pretty much what it's all about. Do you think that it has started to get better or is getting better fast enough?
I think so. I think what Cloud9 did this summer was a good indication of one of the benefits of franchising. I don't think Cloud9 makes that move or they don't last as long as they did, going all the way to 1-10 or whatever it was. I don't think they hold on to the experiment that long if relegations is a tangible threat. I think they probably would have panicked and swapped back faster, something like that. But as long as Jack has Reaper's back and there's no relegation that's going to cost them their spot, Jack can keep having Reaper's back on what he feels like is a good longer-term decision, which clearly paid off. People can start making those kinds of moves, whereas before that was never possible if you had to worry about the fact that you might lose your job.
Do you think that teams are still being too slow on it, or do you think they're going at the correct speed?
I think for the most part, people are going on the correct speed. I think, not everyone can be C9 as much as we want them to be.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they had a fantastic academy team, like not everyone can have a fantastic. It's what a lot of fans don't realize is they blast some team for getting 10th place. It's like, well, someone's getting 10th place, So I don't think everyone can do what Cloud9 did. I think other teams have in the past even done stuff like when Team Liquid was struggling a lot in 2017, they had like 1 million players on their roster they just cycled through because rather than just like sit there and try not to lose, they tried to find a winning approach. So I think people have been like that before, but I do think some people can take the academy system a lot more seriously and put good players. I don't think people generally wanted to be good players on there or find good players, but like if you have the budget to, can you buy a player from another region and say, hey, you're our 6th man. You're going to be swapping in and out and try and find a stronger 6-man roster, a stronger 7th-man roster. Like, is that something people are open to? Can you start pursuing that? Like, 100 Thieves, did they do it correctly with Levi? No, because the import rule was fucked up. But like, I like the idea of it potentially. So I think there's still a lot of room to grow in using what the system currently is.
Okay. And so my final question is for you is, what are your plans for the future? Because you have obviously the analyst desk, you have offline TV, you do your own content, you also do Hotline League with Travis. What are your plans for the future, and where do you want to go to?
I haven't had a plan since I got into esports. The last time I had a plan was like my first year in esports, where I was like, I'm going to do this for 2 years, see where I'm at, see how I feel about it, and if I'm not enjoying it, I'll quit and go back to programming while it's still relatively fresh in my mind. Since then, obviously, I'm still around. Like, what motivated my change from coaching to content and that kind of stuff is basically how much I'm enjoying what I'm currently doing. And so a large part of what I do is just, if I'm enjoying a project, I want to do it more. And if I'm not enjoying a project, I want to stop doing it. And also whatever skill sets I can be learning. Like, I casted Academy, I do like Academy a lot, and I do like the Challenger series, but that was an opportunity for me to become a caster because the whole time I was just on the analyst desk and I had no casting experience. So I took on Collegiate, Academy, and Challenger over the course of the last 2 years to improve my skill set. So if I'm not enjoying it or I'm not learning, I'm not going to keep doing that thing. And so I don't know how long I'm going to enjoy or learn from what I'm currently doing.
Okay, that sounds like a perfect ending for me. This has been Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. Thank you so much, Mark, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.